So this is the last work I made, which was in Gallery Borghese in Rome, and it's a 16th century Baroque palace, beautiful, very grandiose, ostentatious even, and I have built there a 2 metre by 2.5 metre version of the Massacre of the Innocents. So it's like a temple. So every little character in there's about 450 little characters, men, women, and male babies. And as it rotates, basically it's built on the principle of the zoetrope, which is probably the first device of new media ever. 1834, it was the first technique that kind of animated an image, little drawn image, and then followed by a photographic image, which became a montage, which became like an animated film. So this is kind of a contemporary version using the same technique. Very difficult to document because basically what I've got is some stroboscopes that flash in sequence to these little characters that I have. But the characters are all 3D printed models which perform a 1 second loop of animation. As the disc rotates, the light flashes over the top of them, and it gives you the illusion of movement. But it's like 3-dimensional, it's happening in front of you. So it took a while to come up with the idea of this temple and then start designing various characters. Should this guy be a bit overweight? Should the woman be kind of have a thicker neck? Whatever. When all that's done, then I start designing animations. So I start filming like a couple of my assistants fighting on the roofs just to understand the exact movement of the body, and then that gets applied to a computer model so we can work out the best animation. When that's all resolved, those files go to, in this instance, Madrid, and they're printed in Madrid. The architecture is printed in Brussels. And there's a lot of post-production. There's a lot of sanding down and painting and sanding and painting and filling, and then assembly begins, and then there's a certain amount of engineering and a certain amount of electrical circuitry as the whole thing's put together. And then quite a few late nights when the whole thing just doesn't work at all, and it has to be stripped down and like repaired and reassessed and reprogrammed until it's kind of right. So the computer is just totally integral to it. There would be no way you would get that degree of smoothness of the animation without it being designed on the computer and then 3D printed. You could do it by hand, but it'd look a little bit kind of too charming for the execution that I wanted there.
Why the Massacre of the Innocents?
It's like a very popular subject in art history, but painting, and like also in like kind of plays, particularly medieval plays. People just loved it, and the reason why people are fascinated with the images of violence is something that keeps coming back to me. Why is that? I think I've got a few reasons, but with that particular method, when you look at this thing happening, you can't help but be engaged by it. It's kind of quite an intoxicating scene in front of you. It's compelling, you're immediately engaged. And then after a few seconds you realize what you're looking at is like kind of mass slaughter of children under the age of 2 years old. Slightly distasteful. But when you look at a painting like the Massacre of the Innocents, the way that those pictures are designed is that I think anyway, is that your eye can never settle on a particular point, and you experience this kind of frustration as your eye is constantly moving around these legs and arms and muscles and bodies. Never rest on any particular thing, so it generates a kind of anxiety in you because there is nothing, there's no focal point for your eye to rest on. And the more figures there are in the picture, the better it is, because the more confusing this whole kind of orgy of violence is. Violence and sex also works very well with a 1 second loop. There's not a lot you can do as narratives go in 1 second. Things that are highly repetitive lend themselves quite well, but basically more to do with this fascination we have that we keep returning to these depictions of violence. In that room alone, there's frescoes, there's marbles, there's mosaics depicting images of violence. That's always been popular and still is. Grand Theft Auto, Tom and Jerry.